Of all of the TV shows about cynical, depressed, horseman hybrids, BoJack Horseman is, well, the only one really, but it's a great show. It's not exactly my taste, but plenty of the other members of the Gnoggin team love it, meaning this video is pretty much theirs. So let's jump right into it, starting off slowly with the first part of Season 1. Here we are introduced to Bojack, who is seemingly just a narcissist with no regard for anyone in his way. This seems to be a trend with TV shows lately with Rick, Bojack, Archer, etc. Bojack slowly unfolds as a much more complicated character, however, questioning his ability to genuinely connect with other people or animals. He has struggled with depression since his sitcom was on air, and since we've covered depression in depth before, let's just list some of the symptoms that depressed people often exhibit. Persistent, sad, anxious, or empty mood, feelings of hopelessness, pessimism, feelings of guilt, worthlessness, helplessness, loss of interest or pleasure in hobbies and activities, including sex, decreased energy, fatigued, feeling slowed down, difficulty concentrating, remembering, making decisions, insomnia, early morning awakening or oversleeping, low appetite and weight loss, or overreacting and weight gain, thoughts of death or suicide, suicide attempts, restlessness, irritability, persistent physical symptoms that do not respond to treatment such as headaches, digestive disorders, and pain for which no other cause can be diagnosed, and really just a lot of really, literally sad stuff. Bojack exhibits quite a few of these throughout the series, and even though he is often sexually active, it can be viewed as a coping mechanism for a lack of genuine connection rather than an interest. Bojack is a narcissist, often acting as though he is more important than anyone else in his life. He acts as though, since he is a star, he gets his way always, without exception. This is often not the case, and he is left feeling emptier and more rejected than ever. To really explore what causes Bojack to act the way he does, we first have to look at his home life as a child. He grew up privileged in terms of wealth, but in terms of emotional stability, his parents left him lacking. Often abusive, his father, Butterscotch Horseman, was neglectful and critical of his son. His mother, Beatrice, never gave any credit to Bojack's accomplishments, and, like Butterscotch, was overly critical and emotionally abusive to Bojack. The two would also fight constantly, both haunted by their failures and blaming one another for them. Ultimately, Bojack became a punching bag for them as well. Bojack developed a severe critical view of himself and a distrust of other people. This leads to his adulthood of consistently feeling as though he isn't good enough, despite his outward confidence. The idea behind this video, though, is sparked from the Season 4 episode, Stupid Piece of Shit. This episode explores Bojack's inner voice, the voice in his mind that depressed people often deal with. This voice has a name. In psychology, this voice is known as a schema. It is a thought or a behavior that leads to repeated behavior in life. It's a framework built up by past experiences and stereotypes you believe. This is a rather simplified version of the term, as it isn't always a voice in your head, but that voice is part of the schema as the whole. People who have positive schema will often filter flattering information into their mind, keeping them at a plane of contentment. Bojack, on the other hand, represents people with a negative schema. His schema is built from his relationship with his mother, father, and the narcissistic reality of Hollywood, or Hollywoo as it's known in the universe at this point. Bojack looks at life through a negative lens and is often pessimistic about people and their motives. The schema can be explained in a simplified way by setting up a scenario in childhood. Let's say a person with a horse for a face grew up in a household with a horrible father who was cheating on the mother and often displayed sexist ideas. This gives the child a certain view of males and masculinity that is more or less a stereotype of the worst of the male population. The same goes for the feminine side. This seeps into the adult years as an aversion to men and an inherent mistrust of the male friends or significant others in their lives. Conversely, if the person grew up with a strict mother who often violated their privacy, this could lead to an inherent mistrust of women and femininity. These develop the voice in your head that would say, "He's just a pig who's out for sex," or "She's looking at my phone, she suspects me of something." Again, this is a very simplified explanation of how a schema forms for people, and it may not develop the same way that we see in Bojack for everyone. It all comes down to individual experiences and childhood development in your formative years. This episode, however, shows us what it's like for Bojack and people with a similar affliction. When that voice in your head is constantly telling you how horrible you are, it is hard to believe anyone else. It's often a feeling of loneliness when you deal with it as well, because you feel like no one else suffers this. There is also the whole stigma that if you are having conversations with yourself, you are suffering from a mental issue. This is false. The truth is, people who do converse with themselves, either mentally or out loud, are often better at decision-making and reasoning than those who don't. It's no different than thinking to yourself, should I buy this TV right now? No, I probably shouldn't. It's better to be the person who questions themselves as to whether or not they should put a lot of money into something, like, should I buy this TV right now or should I wait for a sale? That is having a conversation with yourself. Or you could just go up and spend a lot of money on something, not even thinking twice about it, because thinking twice is also having a conversation with yourself. Some people do this more than others, and that's where the line gets drawn. There's a stigma against people who do this often, and this stigma doesn't help when that voice that Bojack suffers with is constantly second-guessing and berating himself. Bojack's voice is represented in a distorted animation style and voice, acting as an over-exaggerated and messy version of the art style and voice acting. This is to represent the idea that the voice he battles with is little more than a distortion of his worldview. Throughout the episode, we get cutaways in which his voice tells him he is ruining Hollyhock, his assumed daughter, and that he is nothing but a piece of shit, it tells him, as it also tells him to shut up and drink, only then to call him a stupid alcoholic in the next minute. This voice is how many depressed people feel all the time. They look at themselves as less than everyone else, and the voice inside them tells them to take solace in alcohol or drugs, which is something Bojack does often in the series. It shows that he is victim of this voice, and it is also the reason he cannot make long-lasting, genuine relationships. Jeffrey Young, the developer of schema therapy, believes, along with other psychologists, that the schema is developed during childhood into adolescence. Bojack's childhood was rife with mistrust and always being told he wasn't good or smart enough to do anything in life. His schema developed in such a way that the people he becomes closest to, he still often keeps distance from. He does this because his mental framework says that these people will eventually hate or leave him anyway, so he doesn't see much of a point in trying to be close. When he does get close to someone, he self-sabotages the relationship because it is hard for him to let his guard down and let the relationship grow naturally. He needs constant praise and attention because he can't give that to himself. And this causes him to revert to sex, drugs, and alcohol when he doesn't receive it. Bojack is in a vicious cycle of self-hatred and self-sabotage. Many real people fall into this same cycle too. Bojack isn't someone to be idolized, but instead he is someone to reflect upon. If you relate to him, as many do, then look to the root of your problems. Your schema is not your boss. It is hard to conquer it, but you can. Bojack, at the end of Season 4, starts to conquer this voice as he lets Hollyhock in, and his voice is proven wrong. He didn't corrupt her. He didn't ruin her. We see a spark of hope that he may defeat his self-sabotaging and self-deprecating side after all. Bojack depicted this in a way that no other show has, and it is something to reflect on. The episode goes on to show that you aren't alone when you hear these voices. And also, it's a distortion of the truth of your world. Your schema is a framework for how you react to daily life, but framework can be reworked over time. It is a difficult journey to totally change your worldview and to be kinder to yourself, but just as it was possible for Bojack, it is also just as possible for you.